So, a brand new World of Warcraft expansion is finally here. I've played basically non-stop since Shadowlands launched last week, going through the main story and hitting max level on the first night, then spending the following days unlocking my Covenant, exploring the Maw, fighting through Torghast, and starting the gear treadmill running normal, heroic, and mythic dungeons for that sweet, sweet item level boost. And I want to take you through these first few days of the expansion, covering all I've seen, done, and what I think about it so far. The leveling experience, new zones, dungeons, and various endgame systems for player progression. And with that said, it's still very early on. As of this recording, we haven't even had the first big reset, no one's got their legendaries yet, and the raid is still a week away. But that's why this is a first impressions video and not a review. I would like to give you my early thoughts on the expansion so far, while still being well aware that the newness hasn't quite worn off. Okay, so I'd like to go ahead and start things off by talking about the intro to the expansion, the whole leveling experience, and the newest zones. But first I gotta say that the whole pre-expansion excitement is just always so much fun, like seeing a ton of players all gathered and waiting for the new expansion quest NPC to pop up. There's just a lot of hype and excitement around it that I always genuinely enjoy, and the very start of Shadowlands was no different here. So just to set the stage, once the expansion began, we basically are introduced to the whole process of Sylvanas shattering the Lich King's crown and opening up that portal into Shadowlands. That had happened, and now we are tasked with trying to fix it. Go into the Shadowlands ourselves, restore the crown, and something like that. I don't know. Either the story and wow, I'm sorry. But one of the first places we're transported to is the Maw. This is kind of like this land of purgatory, and we're going to spend a lot of time through the leveling experience, but also in the end game in this location. It's just a rather bleak environment. This is where like a bunch of lost souls are, and there's also a ton of heroes of Azeroth that we have to rescue. So we jump into the Maw, we go about saving a few well-known figures in WoW lore, and then we have to charge up this waystone that looks suspiciously like those S's I used to draw as a kid, and escape. And once we do that, we are brought to Oribos, which is the city hub of Shadowlands. This is where you're going to find a lot of the quest givers for the main storyline, profession trainers, various vendors, as well as access to the expansion's main zones of Bastion, Maldraxxus, Ardenweald, Revendreth, and the Maw. I don't want to spoil the main story, and I also barely paid attention, but I will tell you a little bit about each of these various areas. So the first place you're brought to is Bastion. This is home of the Kyrian, these guardians of the afterlife. It's kind of a pleasant take on death, basically. The whole zone feels like this watercolor painting made up of a bunch of pastel blues and yellows. And originally, actually, when I had played through this zone back in the beta, I wasn't really a fan, but I think over time it's grown on me, especially with how much it contrasts a lot of the darker tones in many of the other expansion areas. Now in Bastion, you'll fight through various kinds of bad memories, these fallen angels, and mechanical constructs. And I actually progressed through this area until I was about level 54, and then I made my way to the next zone of Maldraxxus. Now this zone is quite a big departure from Bastion. It's a very desolate landscape. There are these massive structures made up almost entirely of bone. Maldraxxus is home to the Necro Lords who value strength above all else. In fact, the intro quest has you going into this theater of pain, like gladiatorial style arena where you have to fight off hordes of enemies. Visually, I would say that Maldraxxus was probably my least favorite zone to explore, although it did have some cool enemies with a bunch of different undead, ghouls, and demons, and plenty of oversized bosses to take on. The third zone that you make your way to is Ardenweald, practicing my German, so that's how I'm gonna pronounce this one. This is home to the Night Fae who tend to the fallen spirits. It's a mystical forest zone, and I'm kind of a sucker for this sort of theme in MMOs, so right off the bat, I was a fan of this zone. All sorts of shamanistic, druid, mystic magic, bioluminescent, glowing stuff all over the place, and it's filled with woodland creatures, fairies, spriggans, and spirits. Rescuing and saving these fallen spirits is a big part of the whole process here in Ardenweald. And then the final leveling zone that you make your way through is Revendreth. This is a very dark, Gothic location. It's home to the vampire-themed Venthyr. Big castle structures made of stone, and this area is filled with lots of gargoyles, ghouls, ghosts, and vampires. Now, I hit actually max level about halfway through the Revendreth story. This took me 7 hours to go from 50 to 60. I had done this a couple of times in the beta. I was certainly kind of speeding my way through here. I imagine that a normal run from 50 to 60 will take most people closer to 10 hours, but I was kind of going quick. It was launch day. I was excited, and I wanted to hit max level. Now, I would say of the questing experience overall, I thought it was okay. It wasn't my favorite leveling experience. In fact, I think in a lot of ways, I really enjoyed leveling in Battle for Azeroth much more because it all felt more cohesive. Like, yeah, the new zones I think look really great. Like, Bastion has grown on me. Ardenfield and Revendreth I think are amazing visually. I think it's the whole isolation of these zones that I don't like as much as with prior expansions, where a lot of the entire expansion is all clumped together in a giant continent, or at least in BFA, there were 2 massive islands. The fact that every single zone in Shadowlands is completely disconnected kind of made the whole experience feel a little disconnected for me. Now, I realize that's what they were going for. It's like the afterlife, and we're heading to these different parallel universes or whatever the heck they're called. I know it wasn't meant to be an entire continent of the afterlife. It was supposed to be what it is, but I would just say that this isn't kind of my favorite layout of expansions. I think I like the larger, almost continent style expansions to this one, but it's fine. The zones are cool enough, and overall, I think the leveling experience was decent. So after hitting max level, I had to go through a few more chapters in Revendreth because you want to progress the campaign in order to unlock the various endgame activities. And boy, oh boy, are there lots of things to do. So some of the endgame activities include your Covenant and leveling up the Renown and gathering anima, the various world quests, going through the Maw, doing dailies and gathering Stygia, a new resource, going through Torghast, this rogue-like tower climb. Obviously, there are dungeons, there will be an upcoming raid, there's PvP if you like that, and then there are the various professions that you can do. A lot of things to do and focus on once you hit max level in Shadowlands. Now, the first thing that you're actually introduced to is your Covenant. Upon hitting level 60, you're asked to pick from one of the 4 Covenant factions. Those are the ones that were featured as the kind of the main factions in each of the leveling zones. There's the Necrolords, Venthyr, Night Fae, and Kyrian. Now, each of the Covenants come with their own unique abilities for your character, as well as soul binds that play into the Conduit system, which outside of gear is another form of player progression. This is a big decision. Now, when you're trying to pick a Covenant, it's basically all about which Covenant gives you the best abilities. Now, depending on your class and spec, some of the Covenants will be stronger than others, also depending on kind of what you're trying to focus on, PvE or PvP. Fortunately for my Demon Hunter that I leveled, Kyrian was a clear winner. The Elysian Decree ability is one of the strongest options for both my tank and DPS specs, and I also happen to like the cosmetic outfit that you get with this faction as well, so that worked out for me. Now, once I made my choice, I was directed to Elysian Hold, and this is essentially the home base sanctum for the Kyrian, and while there, you can do things like level up your Renown, which will unlock brand new features. You get to pick which conduits you want to use. Again, that's part of player progression, and you can also send out these companions on missions, which are kind of like the BFA mission tables. Not my favorite part of WoW, but it's another thing to do if you like doing it. Now, one big thing related to your Covenant is anima. Through completing various activities in the world, like doing world quest or dungeons or PvP, you will collect anima, which is then used to upgrade your sanctum with various features. Now, what's interesting about this is it's things like fast travel or unlocking that mission table. Nothing related to the anima acquisition is really directly tied to player power, which has been great because it's made it so that I don't feel any pressure to be grinding anima all day. Like, yes, I could go around doing world quest all day for anima, but I don't really bother bother. I just pick up anima as I do other things, and then I use whatever I get to level up my sanctum. But it's not directly tied to player power, unlike renown. Renown is the second major thing you will be focused on with your covenant, and you'll want to make sure you cap this every week. There will be a maximum amount of renown levels that you can get. You'll level up by doing various tasks and quests. Fortunately, this seems fairly easy to cap. I was able to get my max level of renown 3 for the first week in just the first couple of days. So the covenant is one aspect of what you'll be focusing on at max level. The second thing that I should mention are the world quests. There are world quests like the last expansion in each of the 4 main zones, and doing these quests will reward you with some anima, like I just mentioned. You can actually get some conduits, which are those alterations to your abilities, reputation for the factions in each of the zones. You can also get gold and gear, although grinding gear through world quest isn't going to be as big of a deal in this expansion because it's no longer tied to your current item level. Instead, the item level of world drop rewards for gear is locked behind covenant progression, and as I mentioned, covenant progression through renown is capped weekly, so you really likely won't be grinding much gear through doing world quest. The point of that being, I haven't felt a lot of pressure to do world quests either. Kind of like I don't feel pressure to grind anima all day, doing world quest has been put on the back burner, and that's probably for the better because world quests take a bit more effort than they did in Battle for Azeroth. Many of them are not only just difficult because of the enemies you have to encounter, but there will be multiple steps that you have to go through as well. And outside of the callings, which are basically a daily covenant quest similar to emissaries from BFA, I have felt pretty much zero pressure in doing world quests. Now let's talk about the Maw. This was that first Shadowlands zone that you stepped into. You periodically return to it while leveling, and this will likely be a place that you might want to visit daily as part of your routine. It is absolutely littered with things that you probably want to do. You'll find your best friend Veneri here, and for her, you will be completing various tasks and taking out enemies to gain reputation. Every day, there's going to be 2 new daily quests for you to do. There are numerous bonus objectives as well as rare spawns that you can kill, along with this weekly Wrath of the Jailer event that gives you a nice boost, but also can give you some good gear. What's interesting about this, though, is the more you do in the Maw, if you're going out and doing those daily quests and grinding some rare spawns and doing bonus objectives, the harder things are going to get thanks to this Eye of the Jailer system. This works kind of like GTA's star system. The more tiers you have, the more difficult it is to do anything. The Jailer will send assassins after you, will bombard you with launches from these towers, and will also make you take increasing damage as well as slowing you down until you either leave or die in the Maw. Now, why do you want to farm the reputation or the Stygia resource? It's for the rewards you get from Veneri. There are various consumables and items that can make your life easier in the Maw. The big thing that people might be going for are these spatial realignment apparatuses, which are used to add a socket slot in your gear. Now, this actually takes a fair bit of Stygia along with a very high reputation. So the question you might be wondering is, do you have to go into the Maw daily to be grinding this rep and this resource to get the socket slot? I would say you can, and especially if you're going to be on a kind of progression focus, like with trying to push the hardest difficulties of Mythic Plus or raiding. But if you're not really doing that, if you're not really looking to min-max super hard, funny enough, the Maw is also another activity like World Quest, like the Anima grind, that you don't actually have to feel crazy pressure to do. Like, yes, you're going to get some power from those extra socket slots, but it's fairly minimal compared to just going through basic gear acquisition, either through your base gear or through the legendaries. And speaking of legendaries, let's now talk about Torghast. This is located in the Maw and is a procedural roguelike tower climb, and I would say hands down, this is my favorite thing in the expansion up until this point. So when you first enter Torghast, you're actually presented with a procedurally placed together layout of hallways, rooms, and various open spaces. No 2 runs in Torghast are going to look exactly the same, and each one of the areas that you're presented with are going to be filled with an assortment of enemies, elites, and bosses to take down. So is it just a procedural place where you fight enemies? Well, no, because you're also going to periodically collect these things called anima powers that can grant you massive boost and modifiers for your skills. I mean, these things can be absolutely absolutely crazy. For example, on a recent run, I collected powers that increased my damage by 15% for every floor I climbed, made it so that Metamorphosis increased my size, speed, and melee range by 100%. Anytime I dealt damage, my Immolation Aura would get refreshed, and having Immolation Aura active increased my Chaos Strike by 50%, and that's just to name a few. Come the end of the run, I had close to 20 anima powers active. I was doing an absurd amount of damage on pretty much all of my skills, and I melted through everything, even the final boss. However, it's a roguelike system, and it can go the other way. Sometimes you'll get powers that aren't super crazy and don't make the run just a completely cakewalk like it was for me in that one example. So why do you want to do Torghast, besides the fact that it's fun, I think? Well, the big thing is the Soul Ash. Every time you clear a layer for the first time in a week, you'll get a certain amount of Soul Ash, which is the currency that's going to be used to craft legendary items in this expansion. Every week, you'll have access to a few of the various wings that are available. And for example, in this first week, we had access to the Soulforge wing, as well as the Upper Reaches wing. And each of the wing has its own theme. So there's like the procedural generation, but then there's also a theme for each one of the wings. And when a new week starts, you start off at layer 1, and then you climb to the max available layer that week. This first week, you could only go up to layer 3, and you collect Soul Ash along the way. Outside of the fact that we want Soul Ash to make our legendaries, I just genuinely think that Torghast is a really fun experience. I love feeling super overpowered, getting these really cool anima powers and just tearing through a wing. Now, besides Torghast, I would say the second favorite thing for me this expansion, and in most expansions, are the new dungeons. Shadowlands features 8 new dungeons to explore, 2 of them located in each of the 4 zones. So when I hit max level and I went through unlocking the various endgame features, I eventually started running dungeons for gear upgrades. So I started off in normal until I hit the item level requirement to start doing heroics, and then I did heroics for an afternoon until I eventually moved into mythic. Now at this point, I've cleared all 8 mythic versions of the dungeons in the game, and I had a lot of fun. I've boosted up my item level to about 175, and overall, I've really enjoyed learning the different mechanics and boss fights in this expansion's dungeons. I mean, this is one of my favorite parts of every expansion, going through this learning process of the newest hard content. A few highlights for me, I would say The Other Side is a really, really cool themed dungeon with some fun boss fights. I really enjoy the Hakar boss fight, and I would say the final boss of this dungeon, it almost feels like a raid boss. Like, he's got quite a few challenging mechanics. There's various zone dodging that you have to do in his first phase, and then you go through these portals as he switches to the second phase and to take down these spirits, which will help burst down the boss. It's just mechanically really interesting, and also visually, I just love this zone. I would say Mist is also another highlight. This particular dungeon features this puzzle maze where you have to find the odd symbol to progress through, and if you pick the wrong symbol, Mist door, it ports you back to the entrance of the maze, so it actually requires making sure you do things right and not just kind of blitzing through. You know, eventually people will figure this stuff out. It'll become second nature, but it's cool to have these kind of puzzles, not just trash and boss fights in these dungeons. I also really like the Theater of Pain. I would say specifically Gore Chop is a fun boss fight. It's kind of like Stitches 2.0. Hooks descend from the ceiling. You don't want to get touched with these. And the final boss here as well, Mordretha, is just an absolute, it's just a mess. There's like stuff to dodge constantly. It's crazy. It's quite the dance. I've really, really liked. And even just at Mythic 0, the base version of Mythics, I would say it was doable. It wasn't too difficult, but there were certainly mechanics in this that required some real coordination and execution from your team, and I've enjoyed it so much. I can't wait to see how much more difficult it gets in Mythic Plus. But yeah, learning the new dungeons have been a lot of fun, and I like them overall. I think they're pretty cool. Some other stuff worth mentioning, obviously this game has a big PvP focus. I don't really care too much. I did the weekly quest to get myself some some resources, but that was it. There's gathering and crafting, which I'm going to start doing this week, and a harder endgame stuff is going to be coming very soon. A week from now, we're going to be getting the first raid. World bosses are going to be getting unlocked soon, as well as Mythic Plus dungeons, which I absolutely can't wait for. With all that said, let me give you just a quick recap of the sort of things that I plan to be doing at max level, either daily or weekly. So first off, there are the daily quest in the Maw for that reputation and Stygia so that I can buy those gem slots. I will probably be doing those. There are the Covenant callings, which again are like BFA's emissary quests. You get one a day. They last for 3 days. I'll be running Mythic dungeons every week for gear upgrades, as well as Mythic Plus when that becomes available for that Great Vault weekly chest reward. Leveling up Renown every week to whatever the max for the week is, and maybe a little bit of anima farming on the side. I'll be clearing all available wings of Torghast every week to farm Soul Ash to be able to craft the legendaries that I want. And then if there's like weekly dungeon and PvP quests that you can do for reputation, there are going to be again the World Bosses raid and Mythic Plus coming very soon. And what I think I like the most though is, although I've got all these things that I just listed that I plan to do, the only real daily requirements, if you will, are the daily Maw quests if you want to get those socket slots, and then your Covenant callings, which have a 3-day timer, so you don't have to do them every day. There's actually not a lot that really puts a lot of pressure on me to log in every single day, and frankly, I really like that. I think the shift in this expansion away from making you feel like you want to log in day after day after day to having a checklist every week that you can go through kind of at your own pace, I really like this a lot better. It allows me to be a lot more flexible with my playtime, and I think it was just a good decision for this expansion. So all told, how do I like Shadowlands so far? I would say that while we are still clearly in the early days and the newness hasn't quite worn off, overall I am enjoying it. We'll have to see a few weeks, a few months down the road, once things aren't fresh and new and exciting, how we feel about the general repetition of the play experience, doing the weekly activities, grinding the raid, and how difficult is it to unlock all of our legendaries, stuff like that. It's just going to take some time before we can compare Shadowlands to the other expansions. But yeah, I think my first impressions are generally positive. Torghast is the clear shining feature of this expansion for me up until this point. The Covenants are kind of whatever, you know, the mission tables where you send followers out on objectives. I really don't like those features, but it's fine. It's not a huge deal. I enjoy doing the dungeons. I can't wait for Mythic Plus. I can't wait to check out the raid. But how is the daily grind going to be feeling? How is the weekly requirements and activities and the whole gearing up process? It's going to take some time to figure that out. But up until this point, as of right now, I am enjoying Shadowlands, and I think it's been pretty good. So I'm done with this video. I'm going to go play some more WoW, and I'll see you guys in the next one, all right? Take it easy.